Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, will the Timberwolves add another big man to the roster? Obviously, the deadline has passed for anybody to be signed and be eligible for the playoffs, but the Timberwolves still have an open roster spot. They desperately need help on the glass. Timberwolves owner Glenn Taylor spoke on Darren Wolfson's podcast about this. What are some names the Timberwolves are considering, and would it make sense to add someone to the team? We're going to talk about it on the show here today. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked on Wolves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. I'm also the editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site on the Fansided Network. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Check out prizepicks.com and use promo code NBA or go to your app store and download the app today. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day and happy Timberwolves game day. The Timberwolves this evening will take on the Oklahoma City Thunder for the second time in the last, 5 days or so. A fourth consecutive game against a pretty bad opponent and a chance to continue or to extend the win streak to 6 games. We're going to break that down a little bit later in the show, as well as the lengthy injury list for both teams, really, who's going to play, who's not for both the Wolves and the Thunder. But I want to get into the possibility of the Wolves adding a big man to the roster here based on some comments from Timberwolves owner Glenn Taylor just the other day. So we'll do that here in a minute. First, though, a big thank you for making Locked on Wolves your first listen each and every day. Locked on Wolves is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms like Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey. Really, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find this show. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked on T-Wolves and at Beecken. That's with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. All right, so let's talk about this Glenn Taylor interview first. So Timberwolves owner Glenn Taylor will periodically appear on Darren Wolfson of KSTP and Score North in the Twin Cities on his Scoop podcast, and he's a pretty open communicator when asked specific questions that I frankly a lot of owners wouldn't give this sort of a kind of a wide ranging podcast interview, and that's thankfully what Glenn Taylor has blessed us with here. A lot of things came up in this interview. And so I want to get it to some of the housekeeping type items, injuries, the transition of majority ownership eventually to Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez, some of those things in a little bit. I want to start with the more immediate, the roster things. And obviously Glenn Taylor's not the guy making the decisions for the roster, but he gets a little bit involved in terms of rubber stamping stuff. We know that he's done that in the past, especially significant moves. And in a case like this, where the Wolves are kind of playing really close to the luxury tax line. We've talked a little bit on the show before about some of the incentives on Taurean Prince's contract and some of those things that have that are affecting the Wolves' ability to add somebody to fill their last roster spot. And at this point, the March 1st deadline has passed, where any addition to the roster at this point would not be eligible to play in the playoffs. However, the Timberwolves could use some depth, especially now there's a bunch of guys banged up. There's again, we'll talk about this later. There's 5 guys that are either probable or questionable to play on Wednesday against the Thunder. So having depth wouldn't hurt. And also the Timberwolves remain the 29th team in the league in terms of defensive rebound rate. The offensive rebound rate has slipped a little bit lately, although it wasn't an issue against Portland on Monday night. The Wolves dominated. They had 19 offensive rebounds against the Blazers. But in general, rebounding at both ends of the floor has been challenging of late. Defensive rebounding has been challenging all season. And outside of Karl-Anthony Towns and Naz Reid, they don't have any true big bodies that can play center. So Glenn Taylor said to Darren Wolfson, excuse me, on the Score North podcast that the Wolves would be interested in adding a free agent that could help improve the team's rebounding. Wolfson asked him specifically about Greg Monroe, who was on a 10-day deal with the Wolves earlier this season. I think it was just the 10-day. They let him go because Towns was returning from health and safety protocols, etc. And Taylor didn't say no. He said his verbatim, I think, was, we're looking at a number of possibilities. So there you go. Greg Monroe is a possibility. Later in the podcast, and actually, no, this name didn't come up in the podcast, but Doogie said this on the show himself. So this wasn't, I don't think, posed to Taylor. But Wolfson brought up Willie Cauley-Stein, who, of course, longtime member of the Sacramento Kings, a former Kentucky Wildcat like Karl-Anthony Towns, but has bounced around quite a bit the last couple of years. Uh, According to Wolfson, the Wolves have discussed Willie Cauley-Stein internally. So I want to speak to those two names specifically because those are the two that Wolfson feels are maybe perhaps more likely to be added. First with Greg Monroe. Greg Monroe was fantastic in 3 games in Minnesota. He came off the bench. He, of course, had a monster's maybe a strong word, but I guess considering the fact the guy hadn't played in the league in, like 3 years, had a pretty big, game against the Boston Celtics when the Wolves were woefully shorthanded and Monroe came off the bench. They beat the Celtics at home at the end of December. This is what, December 27th. Monroe played 25 minutes in this game, had 11 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, and a block off the bench in going 5 of 9 shooting in that game. And this was a game when the Wolves were, again, they had basically nobody. I'm going to see exactly. So they didn't have Karl-Anthony Towns and they didn't have Naz Reid due to health and safety protocols. So they started Nathan Knight at center. Greg Monroe came off the bench and played 25 minutes. This was also the only game in which Chris Silva played, by the way. He was on the team for, I believe he was with the team for 2 10-day contracts and only appeared in 1 game. But at any rate, Monroe played well in that game, and then they lost to the Knicks in a much uglier game the next night. He had 7, 6, and 4 and 3 blocks in that game. Then he played in one more game, the New Year's Eve loss to the Utah Jazz on the road. He only played 15 minutes in that game, had 2 points and 6 rebounds. But overall, in 3 games, played very well for Minnesota, added a little bit more of an edge, that veteran leadership, veteran presence that the Wolves, obviously have that with Patrick Beverley and to some extent with Taurean Prince. But the playing style of Greg Monroe isn't ideal. It's not perfect for what the Wolves do offensively. They can throw the ball into him in the post, and he can operate similar to Karl-Anthony Towns in the post. He's a very good back to the basket center, but the Wolves haven't been doing much of that lately with Towns anyway. They haven't been posting him up nearly as much. Now, teams aren't likely to double Greg Monroe, certainly not the same way that they double Karl-Anthony Towns. And that's part of the reason Monroe was so effective, because he was able to go essentially one-on-one, draw fouls, and score at the basket. He is a good rebounder. He's never been an otherworldly rebounder. The rebounding percentages aren't fantastic for his career, but he's a very good offensive rebounder. So that would be adding strength to strength. I wouldn't mind them adding him just as a depth piece and, a good veteran presence and a guy that can play in a pinch, but he doesn't fit with how the Wolves play. And despite the block numbers when he was with the Wolves for 3 games, he's not an outstanding defender. He's not quite the defender that, say, Willie Cauley-Stein is, who we'll talk about in a moment. Also, Monroe, just kind of throwing out what he's done since he was with the Wolves. He went back to the Capital City Go-Go of the G League, the Wizards G League team. They signed him to a 10-day deal. He played in 2 games for the Wizards and then went back to Capital City. Or I'm sorry, he went right from the Wolves to the Wizards. Then he went to Capital City. Then he was signed by Milwaukee. He played 5 games with the Bucks, which is, of course, the last team he signed a big contract with back in, was that 2016-ish range. Played 5 games with Milwaukee. They let him go, and now he's back with Capital City Go-Go of the G League. So he's had 3 separate NBA stints this year, and now 3 separate G League stints with the Wizards G League team, the Capital City Go-Go. So he's stayed active, stayed stateside, been bouncing around the league a little bit. I wouldn't mind adding him. However, I would prefer to add Willie Cauley-Stein. I want to talk about why here in a second, and then we'll also get into some of the other things Glenn Taylor talked about, some of the injury news, and then finally we'll quickly preview Wolves Thunder. The Thunder just played on Tuesday night, and they have a very lengthy injury list. A lot of guys recently announced to be out for the season, actually, for Oklahoma City. So I want to get to that here next. First, though, let's talk about the title sponsors of today's show, and that is, of course, our friends over at Prize Picks. All right, NBA fans, are you looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA? Then you need to try the award-winning app, Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. I love the app, and we know that you will too. It's super easy to use. Just pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. That's all it is. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Prize Picks is safe and offers fast withdrawals. Use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play. They offer any prop you can think of, from points scored to rebounds, even steals is included. And you could do mixed sport entries. Back when football was going on, I was doing mixed sport entries for NFL and NBA frequently, Sundays, Monday nights. It was a ton of fun. But you can do that with other sports as well. College basketball, obviously about to hit the big tournament there. MLB eventually will start. Soccer, MMA. You can cross sports NBA with basically any other sport. It's a ton of fun. For a limited time, PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all our users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point, but you must use the code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans only. Sign up today. Use code NBA $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point. That's all it is. Just scores a single point. Promo code NBA $50 for free on the PrizePicks app if your first entry scores a single point. All right. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. A reminder that for your next listen, you should check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. It's the best way to catch up on all the NBA action, obviously, unless you had the ability to flip back and forth on League Pass all night last night. This is better than any highlight show. You're going to get kind of the local in-depth analysis on each and every game, and it's quick too. It's the quick way to do it with a better perspective than you're going to get, on a broader national scale. So be sure to check out the Locked On NBA podcast and Locked On Now podcast. I also checked out Locked On NBA too, but Locked On Now for those quick recaps of the night's action. All right. So the second name that was mentioned in Doogie Wolfson's podcast with Glenn Taylor is Willie Cauley-Stein. Willie Cauley-Stein was pretty good for the Sacramento Kings for several years, especially towards the end of his time there. He started a bunch of games. He was with the Kings for 4 years. He was a lottery pick too. He was, what was he? He's a top 10 pick, right? Yeah, number 6 pick. He was with the Kings for 4 years, was a starter basically for most of the last 2 years, averaged 12 and 8 as a starter. High field goal percentage guy. He's a very good pick and roll player on both ends of the floor. Not a shooter from the outside, of course, which is true of Greg Monroe too. And then he started 37 games for the Warriors in the 2019-2020 pandemic interrupted season, and also played 13 games for the Mavs at the end of that year. Played last season with the Mavs for the entire year, and now this year has split it between the Mavs and then had a 10-day contract with the Philadelphia 76ers. Only got into 2 games with the Sixers. But the reason why I like him as a fit is because what I said earlier, he could play the pick and roll on both ends of the floor extremely well. He's more mobile than Greg Monroe, both as a roller and pick and roll game. It's just more effective in that regard. And also defensively, he's more mobile. He's more switchable. Now he's in his late 20s. He's not quite likely the athlete that he was 5 years ago. But Greg Monroe is 31, spent 3 years out of the league, has never been the best pick and roll defender, whereas Cauley-Stein is very good. He's also a really good rim protector. He's got a career block rate of over 3%. Last year with Dallas, his block rate was 4.4%. 2 years ago, in the year he split with Golden State and Dallas, it was 5%. And he's the type of guy who can contest on the perimeter and also recover, get inside, get in the paint, grab a rebound. It provides some good help side defense, just more mobile than a guy like Greg Monroe. And I actually think he'd be a really solid depth piece for the Wolves. Again, not somebody that would play in the playoffs. And would he even see regular minutes? Probably not. This is more of a like Naz Reid the other night got his 3rd foul. This actually just happened on Monday. Naz picked up 3 quick fouls in the second quarter. Towns had only been down for a few minutes. The Wolves were up by like 20. So Chris Finch played Jared Vanderbilt at center and McDaniels at power forward. That works against the Portland Trailblazers. But here in 2-3 weeks against, they play the Bucks, or one example here soon, or that stretch against really good teams that the Wolves are going to have. You're not going to get away with that against a good team, against a depleted, bad team, frankly, with no real front court players, NBA caliber front court players. You can play Jared Vanderbilt at the 5 and Jade McDaniels at the 4, but that won't work here in 2 weeks when the Wolves have that just murderous row of opponents. You'll need a guy like Willie Cauley-Stein. Now, he could have gone to Nathan Knight, but there's things that Cauley-Stein can do. He's a bit better defensively. He's got that a little bit more experience in terms of how to defend at the NBA level than Nathan Knight. And obviously offensively, he brings something different to the table than Nathan Knight. Not as versatile, and certainly Knight's still got a ton of upside. But to have a guy, again, who's been there before, who's played in playoff games, who's a big body. He is a legit 7-footer. He's very long, and again, is switchable and versatile defensively. That's the type of presence you're going to want as your 3rd string big down the stretch in the regular season. Now, Nate Knight's going to very likely be somebody that's on the playoff roster because Cauley-Stein wouldn't be eligible to be on the playoff roster. But in the meantime, having that additional depth piece would be really important for the Wolves. So that's what I would advocate for is adding Willie Cauley-Stein to the fold, of the guys that are out there on a rest of the regular season deal. All right. Some of the other stuff that Glenn Taylor covered in this wide-ranging interview, a couple of housekeeping type things. One, he talked about ownership. He was asked if the plan was for Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lori's group to assume control of the Timberwolves, majority control, in December of 23. Remember, they acquired, I think it was about 20%. They were supposed to get another 20% this coming December of 22. And then I believe it's another 20 or at least get over that 50% threshold to become majority owners, controlling majority owners by December of 23. When Wolfson asked Taylor if that was going to happen, he just said, quote, probably. And then Wolfson asked if it could happen sooner or later. And Taylor said both scenarios are possible and nothing's set in stone. So who knows how much of this is what was reported wasn't completely accurate, or if that was kind of like, around the time of December 23, we expect that Taylor's going to give full control over. My guess, and this is my complete and utter guess based on some of the info we got a few months ago, that was out there, is, Lori and Rodriguez are likely still seeking some additional funding. Lori's obviously a billionaire, but this is a $1 billion+ transaction, almost 1.5, almost 1.5 billion. Rodriguez's net worth isn't anywhere near that. They're surely still raising a little bit of money to complete the transaction. And my guess is that if it happens sooner rather than later, Taylor's going to cede control. But if it takes a little longer, I mean, from the outside looking in, everything seems like it's gone well with Lori and Rodriguez, and I could see Taylor being patient to allow that to happen, obviously, if it does take a little longer. So that was interesting that he spoke to that, but also was extremely vague about it. The only other real notable thing, I think, besides, they talked a little bit about Patrick Beverley and how both sides were motivated for Pat Bev to sign the extension he did a couple weeks ago. And everybody knew that, but he did say that Beverley wanted a longer extension than just 1 year, which makes sense. I mean, he's in his early 30s, so you want as much security as you can get. The Wolves, of course, want as much flexibility as they can have going into next year, with the ability to have another expiring deal that would expire following the 22-23 season, that the Wolves could potentially trade if the right opportunity came up. The only other thing was, talked a little bit about Anthony Edwards, and this is a segue into the injury report for Wednesday night, is he did say that Edwards' knee injury is not a major issue, which we've known, but it's nice to hear it from Glenn Taylor as well. Very specifically, he said swelling pain, which is, of course, tendinopathy, in the tendonitis in the left knee, I believe. And so Taylor said they're just trying to buy some time. It's nothing major, and he will be out there soon. And we'll talk about the full injury report here in a minute, but Chris Finch did say on Tuesday that Edwards was trending towards playing on Wednesday. So we may see him out there against the Thunder Wednesday night, but it's good to know that from the Wolves owner directly that it's not considered a major deal, the Edwards injury. Okay. I do want to look at the full injury report. Also, who's out for the Thunder? The Thunder are going to be potentially even more shorthanded than they were in the Friday night blowout loss to the Wolves last week. So I want to get into that here next, and then also what the Thunder have been up to since their loss to the Wolves last Friday, and a preview for the game. So we're going to do that here next. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at Built Bar. This is the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right, thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution, though, because I actually genuinely and truly enjoy eating Built Bars. Have you tried the Built Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite with some incredible flavors: yummy cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. So delicious. These are going to be your absolutely be your new favorite. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, including Puffs. Low calorie, high protein. Replace your candy bars with these. They are truly better. A typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories, but just go to built.com and scroll down to their macros chart. You'll be absolutely blown away. High protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb. Most Built Bars have just 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, and 4 net carbs, but they also have 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which, again, usually around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Mint brownie, coconut almond, the brand new white chocolate cookies and cream, which was their February flavor. I believe they still got some left on the site. They're all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. If they think a flavor might be good, they'll make it. It will be delicious, and it will be good for you. At Built Bar, They're all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first and then figure out how to make it healthy. And I don't know how they do it, but they pull it off every single time. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, let's go ahead and finish the show by talking about Wolves Thunder on Wednesday. First, the injury report. So the Timberwolves have a bunch of guys listed on the injury report. However, it doesn't seem likely that many of them would actually miss the game. Maybe a couple. Jaylen Noel, by the way, who left the game after getting what looked to be a pretty nasty bloody nose in the second quarter of the win over Portland on Monday. He's listed as probable with a nasal contusion, so I would expect Jaylen Noel to play on Wednesday. The Wolves have listed 5 guys as questionable to play, which, I mean, we could go through each of these. Patrick Beverley, of course, has missed a couple games lately, but really more rest. They're listing it as an ankle as they have for most of the season, but he played Monday. So Pat Bev's questionable against the Thunder. Anthony Edwards questionable after having not played in the last 4 games, although he was ruled out much more quickly over the past couple of games. And the Wolves, Chris Finch said on Tuesday that Edwards was trending towards playing Wednesday, but it wasn't a for sure thing yet. So my guess is it's how he wakes up Wednesday, how he warms up Wednesday, how he looks at shoot around. Same thing with D'Angelo Russell, who only has missed Monday's game against Portland. He played in the back-to-back Friday, Saturday last week. He's day-to-day with a hamstring or questionable with the hamstring issue. They're calling it bilateral hamstring soreness, I think is what they're calling it, which for Twins fans sounds a lot like the Joe Mauer injury towards the end of his career. But D'Angelo Russell, same thing. Chris Finch said he's trending towards playing Wednesday, but wouldn't commit to it yet. So who knows? Edwards or Russell, my guess is one of them plays, one of them doesn't. Just completely guessing because why not? I mean, we'll get to the Thunder injury report here in a minute. It's a depleted team that's already the second worst team in the conference, one of the worst 3 or 4 teams in the league. I mean, get a little bit more rest for one or both of those guys, honestly, but we'll see. And then the last players, Jared Vanderbilt, again, questionable with the quad contusion. He's been questionable basically for the last week and has been playing. And then Taurean Prince, who missed the second half of the Wolves game on Saturday with back spasms, played on Monday. Didn't play all that well, but played Monday. He's listed as questionable for Wednesday as well. I think it's probably fair to assume Noel plays and Vanderbilt plays, just given their track records. And between Beverly, Edwards, Prince, and Russell, I don't know. Probably my guess would be a couple of them play, a couple of them don't. Because then you give them 3 days rest between Monday and Friday. Friday, Saturday is a back-to-back. So it wouldn't surprise me maybe if Edwards gets out there tonight. Maybe they give him Friday off, or maybe they give him Saturday off against the Heat. I don't know. And just so he doesn't have to play both ends of the back-to-back. That's probably how I would handle it, because why not? They're playing well. And now, we talked about this on the show, I think Tuesday. The Wolves need to bank as many wins as they can during this really favorable part of the schedule because it's about to get really tough. The Heat game Saturday, sure, but then a few games past that, you get to next weekend. There's like a stretch of 2 weeks where it's just they're all playoff teams and they're all good playoff teams. So banking these wins as much as possible. Nothing's a sure thing. Although beating Portland with no Russell and no Edwards Monday was a pretty sure thing. The Thunder game, it's not going to be all that different on Wednesday night in terms of who they have available. Let's go through their injury list, shall we? It's actually really similar to what it was Friday. Lou Dort actually was just ruled out for the season with his shoulder against a torn labrum. Derek Favors remains out. He didn't play Friday. Same thing with Josh Giddey. He's out for the season. Ty Jerome is out. Mike Muscala is out for the season now after ankle surgery. Kenrick Williams is out. Jeremiah Robinson Earl's been out for a long time. Actually, all these guys have been out for a long time. None of this is really new. Although the Thunder played Tuesday night in Milwaukee. Or actually at home, I think, against Milwaukee. So the Thunder on the second night of a back-to-back, there's absolutely a chance that, say, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander rests and misses this game. Isaiah Roby had been out due to injury of late. He played Tuesday. Maybe he sits out on Wednesday on the second night of a back-to-back coming off an injury. So if one or both of those guys sit, I mean, you're looking at a team that's very similar to what we saw Portland trot out on Monday. The Thunder, they did get Aaron Wiggins back. He missed, believe he missed Friday's game against the Wolves. So the starting lineup last night against Milwaukee for the Thunder, not awful. Isaiah Roby, Darius Bazley, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Terrence Mann, Aaron Wiggins. But the bench, I mean, the only guys off the bench that most people would have ever heard of are Alexei Pokusevski, of course, the lanky 7+ footer who is a 2020 draft pick, and Teo Maledon, same thing, a 2020 draft pick. Uh, Besides that, I mean, you're looking at a very, very shallow roster for the Thunder. And I'm speculating about SGA or Roby resting, but it's a back-to-back. The Thunder aren't motivated to win. They're traveling, from OKC on Tuesday to Minneapolis on Wednesday. Don't be surprised if one or potentially both of those guys sits out, and they're head and shoulders, I guess, along with Darius Bazley. Those are clearly the Thunder's 3 best available players. So all those things will be working in the Wolves' favor. Looking at the Thunder on the season, of course, the Wolves dominated the game against them Friday, and a lot of that was due to interior play, and so that would continue to be the thing that would put the Wolves over the top. Towns, of course, should play. He's not on the injury report, and he should be able to have a field day. Naz Reid had, 20-6 or 20-5 against the Thunder on Friday. Same thing should happen again. Naz and Towns should be able to combine for an easy 40-15 against this team. We'll probably see more Nate Knight. Why not get him a little bit more run as well against a team like the Thunder? I mean, there's just no resistance on the inside. Getting Isaiah Roby back, if he does play, certainly helps. Darius Bazley is okay, but those guys aren't going to be able to slow down Karl-Anthony Towns, and nobody can keep up with Naz Reid either on both the perimeter and inside. It'll help the Wolves, who, of course, struggle on the glass, playing a team like the Thunder once again. I worry a little bit about this false sense of security that, like, hey, our defense is getting back on track after holding Portland to, 27.7% shooting on Monday, and we were plus 27 on the glass or whatever it was. Well, it was also a depleted Portland team. So, careful with the false sense of security in some of these, the rebounding and the defensive numbers. But it's good to see the Wolves executing well in those areas against bad teams. I mean, it still counts at the end of the day. Everybody's going to play roughly the same schedule over the course of the season in terms of quality of opponent. And it's important to win the games you're supposed to win. I just hope that the Wolves that the players, and I'm sure the coaching staff is very cognizant of, like, hey, Saturday against Miami is going to be a completely different animal. We're not going to be able to waltz in there and be a plus 20 on the glass or, hold them to 28% shooting. That's not going to happen. And it's not actually likely to happen against Oklahoma City tonight or Wednesday night or Orlando on Friday night either. So here's hoping that the Wolves can kind of, keep their heads on straight in that regard. But all that to say, the Thunder are a decent defensive team, but that's when they're fully healthy with no Lou Dort, no Derek Favors, no Josh Giddey. They don't nearly have the length or really skill, quite frankly, as they would normally have on either end of the floor. So the Wolves, as long as they can do a pretty good job of staying out of foul trouble once again, and staying aggressive themselves, because the Thunder do a really good job of not fouling, the Timberwolves should be able to control the glass. They should be able to win the 3-point shooting battle. The Thunder are the league's worst 3-point shooting team. The Wolves by the way, are up to 18th in 3-point shooting percentage, which is the highest they've been in a while. So this should certainly be a Wolves win. They're going to be double-digit favorites over at betonline.net. Yeah, should be a win. We'll have the post-game pod following Wolves Thunder on Wednesday, so be sure to tune back in for that. And then, of course, on Friday, we'll get you ready for Wolves Magic. Haven't seen Orlando in quite some time, so we'll have some stuff to talk about there and any other news that potentially breaks about the idea of the Wolves adding another big to the roster. So that's all coming this week on Locked On Wolves. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, the show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as Apple, Google, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. That's all we have for you today. Thanks again for listening to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And while you're making us your first listen, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you can make your second listen Locked On NBA. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.